All right, it's Alexander Lawrence, the Portable Infinite, interview 53 or 54. I'm interviewing the hundred. My goal is to interview the most 100 interesting people in America, and Tom Lecky's definitely one of those. So, and I've known him a long time. And Tom's Lecky, born in '72. He's American antiquarian, bookseller, musician, and artist. He was the head of the book department at Christie's in New York for how many, like 15 years or so?
17.
17 years. And he's the owner of Riverrun Books and Manuscripts. And he also records under the name Hallock Hill. And he's an artist and writer who has published photo books and artist books. So let's stop there. So let's I got like you sent me the Hallock Hill record. It doesn't kind of come
Oh
up.
yeah.
And definitely got one of the records that got me back into music. Definitely. When I we were talking in the '90s. I think you mentioned a band Loudness or something, or was that?
Japanese band? The
Yeah,
Japan
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That the kind of like the band was like just kind of like built around his guitar solos and stuff.
Yeah,
I
yes,
was,
yes.
but I don't really remember much music during the '90s. But I remember you talking about Loudness and stuff. I go, well, I should maybe check. I never have any of the records or anything.
That's funny that you remember that. That was a band that they were an interesting Japanese band that was kind of imitating American hair metal bands of the 80s, and
Yeah.
they adopted a lot of those same techniques and styles, and they sang in English. Um, but they were a decidedly Japanese band. Like the cover of one of their albums is the Japanese flag, and
So what is Halleck Hill? What's the conceit here with Halleck Hill? What's is it? I mean, is it kind of your guitar shredding ability
no,
in there?
no shredding there. So Halleck Hill was a name of that I invented. It's the name of the road that I was living on when I was born, what my family was living on. So I adopted that as a sort of a musical moniker when I was putting out those records from about 2010 to 2015. I stopped releasing things back then in 2015, 10 years ago. And the conceit was very much influenced by my time as a student of Gilbert Sorrentino. It's a lot of constraint-based music that combined sort of two things that I really got planted in my mind by Sorrentino, which were generative devices, things that he was using himself and that he taught at a class at Stanford that I took, and also from the Oulipo, which he was not a member of, but he considered himself aligned with their philosophies and their techniques. And also, Sorrentino was a huge fan of jazz in the 50s, and we would talk about jazz too. So there was this element of improvisation, which is what my original musical interest was when I was a kid, combined with generative devices. So I would take a guitar and I would just sit and I would retune it by ear, not knowing what I was going to come up with. I would just tune the guitar by ear, coming up with something that sounded interesting. I would familiarize myself with it for 5 to 10 minutes, and then I would just record something in that new tuning. So it was like walking into a room, somebody saying, "Here's the new language that you're going to have to speak." It's got a lot of the same words and a lot of the same structures as the language that you're used to, but it's a totally different order and everything. And now just record something with it. And so then I would record something, and then I would record three, sometimes three, four parts over that, so they were all intersecting in a conversation and in a dialogue of pieces, parts of a musical composition played in a language that none of the people who were speaking it really understood.
Well, how would you pull out that live when you're doing loops, or how would you do
It
it?
was very difficult live. So the pieces could never be performed again. They exist solely in the studio. Live, I would do the same technique. It would just be an improvisation, and you're exactly right. I would use loops, or I would use pre-recorded sometimes things. I had tape decks with pre-recorded either spoken word elements or found sounds or field recordings that would then be fed into like the same amplifiers that I was using for the guitar, and I would just play along with them.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I mean, you were playing a lot of shows about 10 or 15 years ago, and that's how I found out about Marissa Nadler because you did a show with her
Yeah, yeah,
back around 2015. And like she has like maybe almost 10 records out now, and she's
yeah.
kind of been doing she's from I guess she's from the Boston area, and she's been doing it the whole time.
That's right. Yep. Yeah.
So how, I mean, I'm trying to remember how I'm guessing Sorrentino wrote me a letter or something and said, "Oh, there's this guy Lecky's in New York, and you should meet him." And then it was like, "Oh," and then I met you. I go, "Well, this guy's we got similar interests. He's a lot smarter than me, so maybe he can." And then we ended up one of the first things we did was we went and met David Markson over there in the West Village, like real early on. And I remember
That's right.
coming. You still live in the Upper East Side there, or is it not anymore?
No, I moved out of the city a long time ago. I live up in just north of Manhattan in southern Westchester County along the Hudson River. Um, yeah, when you and I met, it was definitely through a Sorrentino introduction. I'm sure, when I left Stanford, to come back to New York in 1995, he's very generous in his correspondence. He and I kept writing to each other, and he was generous with reading kind of bad stories. And he read a novel that I had written in '97, and we kept in touch for about 2 years. And I was, a big dreamer at that age. I had ideas of starting a literary magazine or journal, and I had asked him for introductions of people that he knew, or ideas about that, which he shared with me. And he I think that was all, part of this milieu that he was trying to help me with. And he knew that I also had dreams of, publishing, which was another kind of tangential reason for me to go to David Markson, because his two early books, those westerns that he wrote, had gone out of print. And I
Right.
had this very idiotic, quixotic idea that I would convince David Markson as a 23-year-old to let me reprint his novels. And I have the letters and the postcards that he wrote to me where he was like, he took me down, and then he would apologize. And he just it was I had a lot of, high hopes at that age of having a literary career and writing. And it was also the nascent days of the internet. So I taught myself to code in the early days of HTML in 1995, and I started something called QWERTY Arts,
Oh yeah.
uh, which was a site that posted interviews.
I
Because
think I think I was on there at one
you
point.
were. You were because you were the kind of guiding spirit at the time of interviews with interesting people, artists and writers. And so you inspired me to do that. I wrote letters to Rosemary Waldrop, Keith Waldrop, Dallas Weeb, Harry Matthews, and I did sort of correspondence interviews with all of them that
Wow.
I that some of which got published on QWERTY Arts, some of which didn't. I still have all of the responses, and so I did, and I published fine art because I've always been interested in painting and sculpture as much as I have been in books and literature and music. So I had some people that I had met in California and some people that I knew in New York who contributed uh, portfolios of art and some writings about art. And that, I don't know how long that lasted, a couple of years. And then the internet took off. It became like a real thing. And then my life in the antiquarian book world really escalated in terms of the intensity of that and needing my attention. So I sort of stopped and let that slip.
Yeah, I think when we got to New York, I think publishing got a lot more corporate, and a lot of the interesting publications kind of went away. And then you had to have like a big selling book. I think you showed me a book. I think I might have a chapter of it, Charles and Laura, or was that what it
Yeah,
was?
that's
Yeah.
right.
And yeah, I think I kind of moved. I went from Cups magazine and I started doing Free Williamsburg, which kind of which was a similar thing to QWERTY Arts, and I totally forgot about that existed. But yeah, I mean, you didn't really think of like whoring yourself out as an author and just kind of
It just,
it just,
my,
or
my
you were just like more concerned about making a living, and you were married and stuff and all that, or had a family and thing.
it was a combination of those things, Alexander. It was like I wanted to be a writer, and but I wanted the writing to be the kind of writing that no one, no one would read, right? So I was realistic enough to know that I wasn't looking to become a kind of a well-known mass market name, and I knew that the challenges of that were going to be insurmountable anyway. Um, I mean, I actually I didn't fall into my career, but I was given a gentle nudge into my career by Sorrentino. One day we were sitting after class, there were a couple of us who loved to hang out with him after, and we would go out into the courtyard and sit under a tree, um, have a smoke and just kind of BS for an hour or so. And I was at this point where I had thought for at least 4.5 years that I wanted to be an academic and literary critic, etc., professor. And after about 2 months at Stanford, I thought, this is not, I can't, I
Yeah,
don't, I don't speak the language anymore. I wasn't feeling it. And I asked him his advice, and he said, look, if it's not your calling and you don't love it, get out of it. And he said, and then he said, and even if it is your calling, get out of it. And he said, you're gonna have like it's gonna be impossible to find a job. I was interested in William Carlos Williams, Gertrude Stein, avant-garde American poetry, the Black Mountain School, language poets. He said, what is the future of that in academia at that moment in 1995? He read the tea leaves and said, this is going to be very difficult for you to get a job. If you have something else that interests you in terms of putting food on the table, do that. And I did, because I thought, well, here's a way in the antiquarian book world, a way to stay around books, to be around the things that are interesting to me, and not be tied to the academic, shackles. And so I I became really just very, very deep, deep, deep into what is the history of the materiality of it, the idea and the physical being of the book from the 15th century to the present. And I just really threw myself into that. And so writing that I've written, anonymously written thousands of pages of descriptions of books for auction houses, and also for my own business. So I became a writer about books, um, and I gave up on the so-called creative writing, except I didn't. I still write. I still have a I still have mountains of things that I've worked on. I've been working on something this year that's new. I just don't publish. I don't really even seek to do it because I don't. I have so many files of rejections that it's like, why bother other people's time? I'll just
yeah.
enjoy what I'm doing.
I mean, I was lucky because I mean, I had that book of short stories for years, and a friend of mine started a press in the Bay Area, so it's like, hey, I have a book, and then this book of poetry that just came out last year. That was Brian Jacobs was a guy I went to college with, and I ran into him at a Tori Amos concert. I go, what are you doing? He's going, I'm a publisher now. I go, well, publish me. I got 4 books ready to go. And so that's how the poetry book came out. Because yeah, it's always there's always got to be somebody. Either you publish yourself, or there's got to be like somebody that's a good friend or something, or somebody like you and me are kind of like on kind of out here, and and
Yeah,
trying
yeah,
to figure out how to break down the walls of whatever, because it's like
yeah.
you think
I mean,
like
one of the students in Sorrentino's class. I can't remember whether he was in both classes with me or one. He's remained a friend, Eugene Lim. He has become a legitimate, being a legitimate novelist. He writes wonderful books. He's published five, 4 or 5 wonderful novels. Um, and he and I shared our, fascination with the material that Sorrentino taught. And but he dedicated himself to becoming a writer, and I haven't kept in touch with other people in that class. Possibly other people have.
Yeah, you have to have sort of a monomania. I think just just like publish. I've done like a lot of things. I worked as a tour manager for bands, and I worked at art galleries, and just to make some money, and just whatever job came up. I was like, hey, I need to make some money. Let's go. But there was other students. Jeffrey Genedies was a Sorrentino student. Jenny Oakville. They published a lot of books. I used to. I mean, I think I did the Grove Press number with Gintarski in 1990. So that was like the first thing the first time I did the review of contemporary fiction. I was like, at that time I was about 25, and Gintarski, the Beckett scholar, was one of my teachers at Long Beach State, and so I kept in touch with him. And then I was writing letters. First I started writing some fan letters to him when I was still at Long Beach, and I go, hey, there's this Grove Press. He goes, I don't know anything about it. And then eventually, yes, Gintarski interviewed him, and then I transcribed it, and Sorrentino rewrote it. But that was about '89, so that was around the time of Mysterioso, and then. But I also visited him at Stanford a few times. I'm not really sure the dates, but maybe '94. But I remember one of the classes he was teaching was a William Carlos Williams class. You might have been there. What years were you at Stanford? And I mean, most of the people I know from that went to Stanford were the Wallace Stegner. How did you end up at Stanford? And you're an East Coast guy. How did you end up there?
The only grad school I got accepted by.
Oh,
So,
well, like, yeah, I mean, as a West Coast guy, I go to, New York, and, like everybody I worked with was like an Ivy Leaguer and stuff. And it's like, there's all these people with the press, I'm going to parties with JFK Jr., and they all went to, whatever, Andover or whatever, the prep school.
yeah,
Everybody
yeah,
at this party went to, it was Upper East Side, including JFK. They all went to Andover together. And I kind of felt like, oh shit. And like Long Beach State, nobody knows that school. Like, for an East Coast person, the only schools you ever heard of are UCLA, USC, Berkeley, and Stanford.
yeah,
And those are kind of like the Ivy League equivalent schools and stuff. So you ended up at Stanford.
yeah. Because I went as an undergrad. I was like, the only thing I wanted to do was, I thought, was go into academics. So I applied to, I don't even know. Back then it was different than it is now, but eight, 10 grad schools, and all the major English programs, English literature, and I didn't get into any of them except for Stanford, and uh, I was accepted to their master's program with which, let's face it, was just a money making enterprise for them. You went for 1 year. There was no thesis. You took classes and you got a master's degree. And the presumption was that if you were serious and you were dedicated to wanting to continue, then you had a step in the door, and you could then apply for PhD program and to continue on. And there was a pretty good program then. Marjorie Perloff was there. Uh, Jay Fliegelman, who was a big Americanist at the time. Um, there were some pretty serious people there that would draw anyone to it. Um, I was a guy. I went, I studied. My main interest as an undergrad was American literature, like kind of the transcendentalist to the middle of the 20th century, and I had a professor. I went to Columbia. I had a professor who was really interested in Emerson and in his tradition as it led through Wallace Stevens. And so when I got to Stanford, I looked at the course offerings, and in the fall there was nothing really that grabbed me in terms of subject matter, but I saw that there was this guy named Gilbert Sorrentino who I didn't know who he was. He was a name in a course book, but it was the description was generative devices in literature. I still have the syllabus here, and oh, it's right in front of me. Yeah, generative devices in imaginative writing was the name of the course, and it met on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3:30 to 5. And I said, that sounds interesting, the way it was described. And I saw that he taught a class on William Carlos Williams in the spring, so I thought, well, there's a reason another reason to take it. I'll take these two classes. And I had been a creative writer as a high school student. I was the editor of the literary magazine at my high school. I kept writing during in college. I won some creative writing awards in as an undergrad.
Oh
And
man.
so I thought of myself as a writer in that kind of pretentious, idiotic, young person's way. And so I thought, okay, this is going to be a class that's going to continue my interest in that part of my personality while I study academics on the other side. And the Sorrentino class just destroyed destroyed any interest in the other side. It became a worldview. I mean, that class, things that I learned in that class or thought I learned or misinterpreted, have they influence everything that I've done since then for good and bad, because Sorrentino has a lot of opinions. He's a very opinionated. He could drill things into you, both positive and negative, about his way of looking at writing and the world, and they really could color how I approach things. And it's taken some time to realize, well, wait a minute, maybe maybe so and so's not so bad a writer. Maybe that was a thing of its time. And but if I'm sure you've read Sorrentino's essays, the Something Said. I mean, to me, that was life changing. Just the way he reads people and the way he writes about them. And he taught that way too. It was very dynamic, very hands-on, language-based. Um, and humorous, funny, engaging, inspiring. I mean, all of those things. So he made a huge impact on how I read and still read.
Yeah, I remember sitting in on one class on William Carlos Williams, and I mean, there was like 20 new ideas that I never really even thought of. I just go, wow, like you know, and I would just be going back on the Cal train back to San Francisco and go, wow, man, that was a trip. And yeah, there's probably things, yeah, you can't. I mean, you're almost in it's a cult, the Gilbert Sorrentino cult or something, because I mean, because I mean, he. I mean, for one thing, he's like from New York, and I mean, when we moved to New York in the '90s, there were still kind of those New York characters kind of lurking around with
Yeah.
and some of them, a lot of them are gone now. And then not only get the New York, old New York kind of vibe from Sorrentino, you also get like the interest in Black Mountain and kind of like he kind of
Yeah.
knew all those guys, and which is kind of disappeared also. So you're kind of, I mean, there's this like whole channel that he's kind of like the expert on the the
Yeah, and then you mentioned Grove earlier. He was a pretty significant editor at Grove. I know he worked on the autobiography of Malcolm X. I don't know how involved he was in the structure and
well,
creation.
let me interrupt you. I mean, one of the things you did for Cuts magazine was we'll see,
Yeah.
was the sheep, or you did a little Irving Rosenthal. Can you talk about how you found out? I mean, Sorrentino is also, that's how I found out. I mean, in one of the interviews, he talked about sheep, and I go, oh yeah, I never heard of this book. It's a famous beat novel. No, I never even heard of this guy.
I know.
I gotta go check it out. So I bought this copy, and then you said I want to do a thing about Irving Rosenthal, I go, well, yeah, good idea, because like, and
Yep.
then like a lot of people have, at least 5 or 10 people have said, hey man, I saw that thing about sheep or in cups. I mean, and how did you come about uh Irving Rosenthal and sheep, or like getting involved in that?
So I don't remember exactly what the order was, but in Sorrentino's classes and in our talking to him after classes, he would mention certain writers and mention certain traditions and I think first came my his introduction to Edward Dahlberg, and I had always had a like a weakness for those spiraling sentences, the Sir Thomas Browne, urn burial, those things that kind of spool out on the page. And so when he introduced me to Dahlberg, and I read, Can These Bones Live, and uh, his other major
Uh,
works,
because I was Flash,
because I
or
was blessed. Thank you. Um, uh, those books hit really hard, and they just felt right. And so Sorrentino said, "Well, if you like that, then you should read this forgotten beat novel." And he said it's not really a beat novel because it's too late, but it's retrospective and it's about the players. It's got Herbert Huncke, it's got Ginsberg, and it's called Sheeper. And I edited it at Grove, he said. And he recounted, he said, this is like the expert in sentence design. Of anyone I've ever read, Irving Rosenthal was the best. He said, I walk by the book once a week and I'll just take it down and I'll read a paragraph. And he kind of he framed it that way. It's like a book that it's like a writing manual. And so I've sought it out, got it. That was one of the great things about being out in California there. The used bookstores were amazing. I mean, all up and down the peninsula, and of course Serendipity and Moe's in Berkeley. It was the heyday. So if somebody said go, read Lynn Haginian, you could go buy one of her books. Now you get it online, but at the but it was fantastic. So I got the book, I read it, and I just fell for it. And he would tell stories about Rosenthal coming into the Grove press offices while they were editing it, and Sorrentino said, I'm talking to this guy who obviously is just such a refined craftsman. I'm not I But every once in a while I'd say I think that there's this one issue on a sentence, and he recounted this story about sitting down with Rosenthal, and Rosenthal, he said, look, I look, Irving, I think you're on this is a brilliant passage, but I think this one word in this one sentence isn't working. And he said Rosenthal got up, walked over to a filing cabinet, and just started to beat his head against the filing cabinet and just weep and just say, "Oh no, no!" And he sat down on the floor, and Sorrentino was saying to himself, like, "What have I done? I feel so bad. I should have just dropped it and left it." And Rosenthal said, "No, you're right. You're right. It's the wrong word. Now I have to fix it." And those kinds of torturous decisions were just weight on him. So after so then I left Stanford. I kept in touch with Sorrentino at the same time. Like, it was all simultaneous. Like, you and I were introduced to each other, and you were generous to have me come along to meet David Markson, who was, a hero of mine at the time, uh, for his late books. I think at that time maybe only Reader's Block had come out. He hadn't written the last
yeah,
three.
yeah.
But I remember just sitting in that living room and looking at all the books. Do you remember that? Like, looking at all of the books
Yeah,
on his
he said, yeah, he said that's everything by the Greeks right there, the 40 volumes. What do you say? I've read it like 2 times. That's all I
Yeah.
can read these days.
It was great. Yeah, he said he had given up on reading modern books, and that he was at a period where he just wanted to reread things. That's what I remember. And so in terms of Rosenthal, so now I don't know. I think Sorrentino mentioned to me that he had known Ira Cohen, and so these are the early days of the internet. And I looked something up, and I found that Rosenthal's letters to Ira Cohen were at the University of Delaware. And then I found that Rosenthal's letters to Allen Ginsberg were at Stanford in Ginsberg's archive, which Stanford had bought like in the late 80s. So I wrote to both Stanford and University of Delaware requesting copies of these letters, and I got them. And I read through the letters, and there was a lot. They were written around the time that Sheeper was being written, and so they kind of they gave context to what Rosenthal was thinking at the time. And Rosenthal was, he's sort of infamous for having published a portion of Naked Lunch in the Chicago Review, which shut down the Chicago Review, and he got, booted from the university. And so I thought, well, this is a project. I wrote, I found an address for Rosenthal in San Francisco. I completely knew nothing. I didn't know about his famous, cauliflower commune. I knew none of this stuff. I was just a guy in New York who liked this writer, and wrote to him. And so I wrote to him, and he wrote back. And Irving Rosenthal and I then had a correspondence for several years, both through letters and through email. He emailed me. I'll never forget. I learned, this back in the day, early internet. So you used this thing when you did a search. You called it fingering. You fingered for somebody. It was like you were poking in, and so I got this letter from Irving Rosenthal, and he said, I bet you wonder how I found you. It's like I fingered you. It's the first time I'd ever heard this phrase. And so we had a correspondence, and I asked him if I could edit his letters to Cohen and Ginsberg, and he said yes, he would want to read them and comment on them after I'd done it, but he gave me his permission to do the project. I spent a couple of years transcribing them and editing them and putting down footnotes, etc. And then I dropped it. Nothing ever came of it. And Irving and I stopped corresponding, and my life kind of just moved on. And I never brought it to fruition. It's another thing. Like, I've got, this is my Gil Sorrentino archive box. I've got an Irving Rosenthal archive box with all of this stuff in it. And but I love that book, and I think I always keep a copy nearby. I think I have one here in my office, and I it's the kind of book that I go into a used bookstore, and I try to it's the first book I look for, and if they have it, I buy it. They're usually like $2. I buy it, and then I give it to somebody because I want to I spread the word on cheaper. Um,
So we're kind of running low on time here. Well, if people want to contact you, the best place to go is thomaslecky.com then, or
yeah, that's great. Thomas Lecky, Thomas.
let's talk about some. I mean, just briefly, let's talk about some of your other projects. Where you're doing photography and music still, or what's going
Yeah,
on?
for a number of years I got into photography. I did photography from when I was a kid, but then around 2017, 2018, I started to get really into photography again, and I've published a few things. One is a is an it's actually an Oulipian book. It was all based on a constraint and a fictional character. I invented a fictional photographer, made an archive of his work, and then a fictional editor who edited this archive, and then a fictional publisher who published the archive. It's called the Archive of Bernard Taylor, that I published through my own self-published, publishing imprint called Understory Books. And that um, I've done a few other smaller projects in photography. And in music, I'm playing a lot again, recording some now, but no huge plans for any major work.
So we'll put a link in the description from thomaslecky.com. Is there somewhere else? They could find you on Instagram or
Yep,
or social.
Instagram.
That's
I,
a good
I
place.
started I started a Substack not too long ago
Okay, yeah.
called Margin and Measure, where I'm trying to do a little bit of um uh, another quixotic project, which is to do a post a day where I record something. I record a musical composition every day and post it every day. I think I'm on like day 22 or something now. I don't know how long this is going to go on. It was more of a self challenge, but it's the kind of thing. Given that I work for myself and the way I work, I'm lucky to have my own office here where I can work. I can walk down the hall for 5-10 minutes, record something, and done. So it's a and then I've been trying to share texts and little ideas and things that interest me out through it.
All right.
I will say Christopher Sorrentino is doing a great Substack.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
talking
Well, yeah, I'm gonna talk to him like next week and stuff. We'll
great.
talk a little bit about that. Okay, well, thanks for talking to me today, and I think that's it. Let me shut this off, and we'll talk. Let's see. Wait a minute.